Hey gang, good to see you all again.
Good to
So
see you
excited,
all.
so excited to greet Scarlett, who's going to be telling us a bit about education and our young people, a really important topic. Also, so happy to welcome our collaborator, Jenny Parks, today, who's going to give me a little bit of a break by facilitating. So I'll be here just enjoying things for a change. Can't wait to see it from a new point of view. So I will turn it over to Jenny.
Hello, everyone. My name is Jennifer Parks. I am a anthropology graduate at Arizona State University, and currently in review for my master's program in global health. It's a pleasure to be here today, and the chance to get to talk to Scarlett and listen to everything that she has to share with us. I do want to go over the Casey presentation guidelines today, and starting off by just stating this is a positive, safe space for all autistic voices. I myself am autistic, but went undiagnosed for majority of my life until just a few years ago. Many people here also have PTSD, which that also sometimes manifests in slower processing, which is also a general autistic trait for some of us. This can make it a challenge to share with the group. So if anyone needs to raise their hand, to use the icon or wave in the screen, to take a turn to speak. And we are also a relational group. And it's easy to go far afield, but we do try to stay in the ballpark of the presenters, Scarlett's today's subject. Also, please limit remarks to around a minute. That way we have plenty of time for the guest collaborator and everyone else to fully engage and get a turn. If you've already spoken once, just give a little bit of room for other people to process and join in the conversation as well. And we want to ask that people stay away from incendiary subjects. People are more than welcome to schedule their own sessions as well, to invite discussion around more difficult topics. And some people communicate primarily through writing text in the chat. So please respect the chat feature. And if you want to communicate through the chat, and we will read your questions and comments out loud. And if you want us to do that specifically, say read right before your comment. And finally, we just ask that people please put themselves on mute when you're not speaking. And we have a lot of people here with auditory sensitivities and things like that. And that way everyone can have a good auditory process. And yeah, um, definitely excited to hear what Scarlett has to say about education. That's a topic that's been important for me as well, and I'm sure it's for a lot of other people. So if you would like to begin, Scarlett, we would love to hear.
Thank you, Jenny. I should just say as well, interface wise, I'm used to Teams, so I might be a bit slow as well with recognizing if people are doing things, trying to communicate things, because I might be looking in the place where I might automatically usually look, and it will be different. So just to say that. So thank you so much for inviting me here today. So I just wanted to talk. I've got a few slides, and Roger is kindly going to share them for me. I don't want it to be death by PowerPoint, so they're just as a bit of an aid memoir for me, really. And then I thought I'm hoping to kind of zoom through them quite quickly, no pun intended, just so that we can generate discussion. But then I really like to hear from you guys as well. So my journey, um, I don't have a formal diagnosis yet, but suspect I am autistic. Lots of my family are. my son, who is 16 at the moment, was diagnosed with sensory processing disorder when he was about 9 or 10. And then sort of in the first year of secondary school, he was diagnosed with autism. And the experience I'm going to share with you today is kind of bringing you up specifically to the past year of activity in us trying to get him the education that he's lawfully sort of entitled to in the UK system, but also just some of the hurdles and sort of challenges in getting that. So I don't know if you guys will use the same terminology, but in the UK, we call what my son has an educational healthcare plan. So just like it says on the tin, it covers education, it covers health, but essentially what it means is if a child is either in a school setting or outside of a school setting, the local authority is responsible for providing that education provision. And it's supposed to be a very child-centered, family-centered provision where the child and the family are seen as the sort of stakeholders who best understand the needs. And it's a tricky one because it's almost like the legislation hasn't quite caught up with what we now know about autism, about sensory processing disorder, about any number of ASD kind of conditions. So there's a magical package called EOTIS, which is education otherwise than at school. Now, what EOTIS means, and this has been our challenge over the sort of past 12 months specifically, it's if you were to Google Section 61, Children and Families Act, the legislation is large, but also deliberately ambiguous. So EOTIS can be used in any way that promotes a child's education and health. It is supposed to be sort of really directed at kids who, for whatever reason, can't or won't attend an in-person school setting. So that might be because of sensory dysregulation, social dysregulation, breakdown, you know, in other school settings, whatever that might look like for whatever reason. Now, the thing to me that's very magical about it is that it really is up to families, along with the local authority, to design the package, what the package looks like for each individual child or young person. And that's where we kind of came into sticky sort of territory, because each local authority is under no obligation to explain in plain English what an EOTIS package is. So the way it was explained to us was that it came along with a very specific set of criteria, which when we delved into it further, we found out were imaginary. So we were told that my son had to choose a pathway that included GCSEs or any other accredited qualification. And all my son wanted to do, and he has said this consistently for 12 months, is I want to learn programming, I want to learn coding, I've costed to the penny the computer equipment I need, I want to build my own computer, and I want to use Code Academy for self-directed learning. And the pushback we kept getting, we've been through like 5 different coordinators, they call them. They're the people at the council, the local authority, who put your plan together for your child. They've got a really high staff turnover. Each coordinator deals with about 250 cases. It's chaos. So we kept putting forward that request, and we kept being told, no, you can't have that, because Code Academy is a US platform. It's not Department for Education registered. It has no Ofsted registration, which is the body who oversees sort of how education providers or schools are doing in the UK and sort of gives them a rating, good, outstanding, that sort of thing. So no, you can't do that. But the really strange thing was, we got to the point where they said, actually, we've got this really amazing package for your son's Otis. And we suggest he does 2 GCSEs, one in maths, one in computer science, and he does some discrete learning with a mentor from an organization that can just talk to him about coding without the equipment he'd requested. And this kept being presented as though this was the best thing in the world and we had to accept this. So under duress, I said yes. I should also say that this package, when you count the GCSEs and the other bits, it cost £19,000. So the package that my son requested cost £5,000. So simultaneously, we were being told, you have to be mindful of the public purse because this is taxpayers' money. So then my son kept saying, but I'm asking for far less than you're trying to give me, and I don't want to do those GCSEs. I just want to learn coding. And it got to the point where my son said to me one night, where does it say that these courses have to be accredited? And I feel really silly relating this back to you. But I was just like, they just keep saying it. Like, it's obvious, it obviously must be if they keep saying it. And particularly if it's so much more expensive than what you're offering, then that must be the way. So that made me second guess. And I looked at the legislation, nothing about any criteria around accreditation. And I spoke to IPSI, who are a really amazing educational charity in the UK. And they said to me in plain English, no, it's unlawful to stipulate that there is any such criteria. And they gave really good examples, like really tangible examples, like some kids, as part of their Otis package, they might have a workshop made in their garden so that they can do woodwork. Or some kids might do horse riding and they might do that, I don't know, 5 days a week, or they might get a horse or something. So it's very tailored to very specific and individual needs. So then we went back to the local authority, and I won't bore you with every interaction, but it's taken a year for them to admit that what they had previously told us wasn't actually correct. And then, as if by magic, they have finally approved initial ask, and he got all of his equipment last week, and it's been amazing. But I was a bit miffed as well to get a response today, which kind of upheld a lot of the stuff that we had formally complained about, but also tried to sort of make excuses for, yeah, but we said it was accredited because that means a young person will be more employable, and stuff that doesn't really add up. So that's and I've put kind of the timeline here, and you can see I've taken it back to sort of from when we first interacted with the school around what I thought presented as sort of autism or sensory processing disorder. And I've put here the thing about the brain glitch, because that was a comment from first Senko when he went to secondary school. The Senko didn't properly understand the condition. Our occupational therapist at the time gave me a questionnaire to fill out about, and the Senko a questionnaire to fill out. And she said to me, I just want you to know that everything you've said to me about you not thinking the Senko understands is correct, because he has written on his survey that has a brain glitch. And she said I was really horrified by that. So that's just to try and take you through some of the kind of landscape we've been. It feels like a battle. I don't mean to sound melodramatic saying that, but it just feels like it's been a very difficult process. Obviously, during COVID, cohort at school were the first year in secondary school to be affected by the lockdown, so they kept closing the schools. And I think in their school, even though it was a pioneer school and it was a new school and they were the first and only year in the school, I think they had around 60% of the kids had a formal diagnosis. So that's kids who have been diagnosed. So you can imagine the amount who hadn't been, and who were constantly being told they were naughty because they put their jacket on if it got cold when all the windows are open because of COVID, you know, and these kids would be sanctioned for things like that, when they were just trying to regulate their sensory environment. And again, the school didn't necessarily understand that. And where I used to feel very angry about that, I have swung sort of in the other direction to teachers aren't qualified, unfortunately, to spot all of these things. And particularly in secondary school, where they're dealing with loads of different classes of kids a day and they're moving around all the time, they're not going to spot that when you've got 30 kids in each class. And you know, it's really, really hard. So that's a little bit of a flavor of what we went through. On slide 4, I've listed what I think are sort of key barriers, and I've kind of talked around some of those already. So what I think is clearly an unlawful sort of enforcement of EOTIS, high staff turnover in local authorities and in schools, which means that parents are having to repeat themselves all the time. Things are getting missed, you know, like things are supposed to go to panel, but our first coordinator we had, she said to me, oh yeah, so this is going to go to panel tomorrow and I'm leaving the next day, by the way. So there was like a 6-week gap between her her successor joining, and she was a temporary staff member, so she left in 6 weeks after that. Do you know what I mean? So it's like a relay race, and a lot of times they're a bit incompetent or they're just overloaded and they're burnt out, and I sympathize with that as well. So that's difficult. I think weirdly, actually, as I look at this and see it like this, actually bang in the middle is the lack of creativity around applying EOTIS, because from a local authority point of view, they very much see it as bog standards. Well, if these kids are doing GCSEs, and that ticks a box. And I would imagine, I know it's cynical, but I would imagine that that's probably useful data for them, like we've pushed this many kids through GCSE stage, that kind of thing, rather than actually something meaningful. And the other thing I noticed was there's quite a cozy relationship between training providers and local authorities, where some of the imaginary criteria they're telling parents need to exist, they're not really applying to the types of providers that they're trying to use, which is weird. I mean, we had a provider called Young Giants for about 2 weeks, and this guy who was lovely would talk to my son for like 2.5 hours a week on Teams and or Discord or something, and they would talk about Bitcoin, and my son kept saying, I'm not interested in Bitcoin, but this guy keeps talking to me about it because he didn't know what else to say. So that's a bit weird as well. And then, like I said sort of at the beginning, the misplaced sort of, you know, talking discussions about costs, when actually the people who really aren't being mindful about the cost are the local authorities, because not only are the provisions that they are endorsing usually more expensive, I'm sure not always, but often, than what children or young people themselves want, they're also, because of their inefficiency, they're also drawing down on their resources as a team in a really inefficient way. So those are some of the barriers for me. I'll stop there because I feel like I've just been rabbiting on, and I know some people, I think one person at least maybe wrote something and I completely didn't pick it up. But kind of over to you. What do you think? What do you know? How does that sound?
For me personally, I agree with you on these key barriers, mainly being the lack of creativity. I think the thinking outside of the box can solve a lot more than people realize. And I do see this as a reflection of the lack of diversity of mind in these spaces where neurodiversity hasn't had that ability to be as strong and destigmatized as it should be. And if anything, autistic individuals and neurodivergent individuals are incredibly creative. And I think that your son's personal experience attests to that, for him saying, no, I figured it out. This is what I want to do. This is the best option. That's something I relate to myself. I've had similar conversations with my own mom. And so I think that trying to put anyone in a specific box or the cookie cutter version that they desire to put us in is just never going to work. And that patient-centered, person-centered, whether that's healthcare or just in your regular life, that is how we achieve true like wellness and allowing everyone to thrive in the way that suits them as an individual. And so I definitely agree that the IOTAs sound amazing to be able to have in theory, but the application, I think, needs to be respected more by the law side of the government there in the UK.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Do you guys have, is it similarly complicated, or and is it different from state to state?
It's different from state to state. I think raised his hand, but Dawn is also raising her hand. um,
Yeah, I wanted to, getting to know autistic culture as we have here at Casey. And again, this will sound cynical, but I feel like there's an active cultural hostility to getting us what we need. And I think it's not plainly stated enough. I'd like to hear your thoughts on that, Scarlett.
I think that's absolutely right. And one of the things that I found really ironic throughout this whole experience is that neurodiverse people are, like, one of the tropes about us is that we're very rigid and will only do things in a certain way. And yeah, sometimes that's true, for sure. But this whole process I found to be utterly rigid, like to the point where it was willing to, this particular organization, or the way that they wanted to enforce this, was totally unwilling to be flexible unless you demonstrated utter kind of resilience in persisting with it. And actually, I had forgotten this. One of the people I spoke to about it from the local authority said to me, I just want you to know that one of the reasons we are being so strict about EOTIS is because lots of parents have just been asking for it and just been getting it. Now, I know from my research that out of, let's say, 400 kids in this borough, only 10 of them have been awarded EOTIS. So that's not true. And if it is true, it sounds to me like some parents have either been more savvy, gotten legal advice, and the council do not like that because it takes the power out of their hands. So yes, I agree, Dawn. I think absolutely. There's another system in the UK called PRU for short. It's a pupil referral unit, and it's kids who are naughty, who they chuck out of mainstream school. And this also has the benefit for mainstream schools of, again, cleansing their stats. So we don't have any troublemakers, we don't have any truants, we don't have anyone who are bringing our stats down in terms of academic achievement or bad behavior. So they put them in a PRU where they are going to meet other kids who might have some social challenges. But lots of the kids in PRUs are undiagnosed kids with autism, with ADHD, with sensory processing disorder. So you're absolutely right. And often Prue is a pathway to jail, you know. And this is going to sound a bit crass, but usually the difference is, in really blunt terms, parents who understand and advocate for the kids and parents who don't or don't understand, maybe, you know, have a diagnosis, well, not a diagnosis, but maybe have a situation themselves that they're not aware of. But it does seem to broadly fall into those camps, because I know if I hadn't advocated for my son the way I have, there would have been certain moments throughout his school career where he would have been labelled naughty, or he was never expelled or anything like that. But I think people don't know how to handle some of the behaviours. And for me, another key is, this will sound awful, but I remember, and this was a deputy head mistress who said to me at primary school when we had the sensory processing diagnosis, but not the autism one at that time, she said, I always forget because he looks so normal. And I just thought, imagine if you said that to a child who is intellectually kind of handicapped or something. Do you know what I mean? You wouldn't, it's, I think it's really hard, and I mean this in the most generous way, I think it's really hard for certain people to really get their head around neurodiversity and what that might look like, and because it presents in so many different ways in so many different people, and there's so many different comorbidities, etc. I just think people don't know. So it's funny. I'm really conscious, I think there's some comments. Should we look at those? Sorry, I'm not very good at this bit.
You're fine, Scarlett. There is a comment that does say to please read here. It's a little long, so bear with me, but I'll read it out for us. It says ChatGPT or Gemini may help with law. A prompt that would work for ChatGPT might be interface UK plan law with their son's requests, compose a justification for the son's plan under legal stipulations. Then you get a document. You can take and transcribe their document and prompt, outline how this plan meets and fails to meet UK criteria. How can the district compensate for failing to initially recognize his plan? The text produced needs to be vetted and dialogued further, like what can I say to my mentor who likes to talk about Bitcoin because I don't want to talk about it. AI dialogue might help produce text to change policy or education of staff. Dawn can give you their contact info, and they're not used to the UK, but they are very used to AI for advocacy in the US.
Thank you. That's a great idea as well. That's really helpful. Thank you.
Was that wrote that, Jenny?
It says, I don't think the name is listed. I think it just says, yes, I'm not sure who exactly that is.
Okay.
And I think it says the best GBT to use will be Scholar GBT. I'm going to write that down. I don't know if it's worth going. Actually, I was going to say some of the tools I used, I've kind of gone through those really anyway. It really was about, I think lots of you might understand what I mean as autistic people trying to navigate this. I don't know if you have that moment where I did, where I was like, oh my God, why didn't I just ask about the criteria straight up, first of all? And then there's that weird, I feel like personally I have this schism between being quite skeptical about people. And then on the other hand, being like, I'm going to take this in good faith, like you're a legitimate organization. So if you tell me you're recommending a certain thing, I'm going to think there's a certain amount of legitimacy that goes with that, which is why I bought the whole thing about, no, he has to do GCSEs for so long. And for me, that was a real kind of thunderbolt moment, because I thought, oh my God, you really do have to question everything. And I feel that that's one of the things that makes the system so undemocratic, in that all different parents will have all different sources of information. One of the things I've recommended to our local authority is, look, why don't you have a plain English explainer sheet which says in non-legal, non-ambiguous language what an EOTIS is, what its boundaries are. Because if you're a parent who's fresh to the system, and you're caregiving to somebody who is a young person on the spectrum, you're doing your job, you might be on the spectrum yourself, you've got 101 things you're doing, you're not realistically going to have that time or energy to start kind of unpacking all of this legalese. And I feel that without that really transparent, look, this is what it means for you, and this is how we would recommend applying it, but you can do this because it's meant to be bespoke. I think without that, it becomes a bit of a minefield, and it also becomes a really malleable tool that local authorities can use as they best see fit, following their strategy rather than what the individual young person's is. And I also tried to flip it back on them and say, if my son was a truant and he hadn't been at school for like 12 months, you would fine me, or they have offered some money, by the way, but that's difficult as well, because yeah, it's nice to be offered money, but it's really hard to quantify in lots of ways how missing out that much of education, it's hard to put a price tag on that. And it makes it feel a bit icky as well. And then particularly if it's an okay figure but not a great figure at the same time, then you find yourself feeling a bit petty if you do quibble about that part of it. And really, you're not quibbling about that part of it, you're quibbling about the way that the whole thing has been dealt with. But it's a really strange kind of conundrum I have found. I'm just looking.
Did you want to say something?
Go on.
Yeah, this is a good point to segue into my question about, if you don't mind sharing, how this has emotionally affected your son.
That's a really good question. And I have sort of double answers to that, if that makes sense. I think on the one hand, like the side he shows, he considers himself lucky to have been quite lazy for a year, to have watched as much anime and read as much anime, or watched or played as much Destiny as he could possibly dream of, But on the flip side, what I see, particularly the more I understand, is his nervous system has been in total dysregulation. His sleep pattern has been disrupted. And, many autistic people have quite disrupted sleep and stuff anyway, but this has accentuated that. I think there was probably a lot around lack of confidence because of it as well. He hasn't suffered in other ways though. His whole friendship network is online, and that's a mixture of people he's played with online for years and years, but also a couple of kids who he knew in real life from times he was at school and things like that. So it's weird, because in some ways I think he's super confident, and what also helped through this process was his ability to begin to advocate for himself with the local authority. And the current coordinator said for her that was quite pivotal, because to have him sitting across from her on a call saying, what I've told you, what my mum's told you, that's all I want to do. And if you try and make me do anything else, I'm not going to do it. And she said that was just quite, powerful. And I think when you ask the impact it's had on him, I think being able to deliver that and seeing that it was powerful, I think that helped kind of him regain some sort of feeling of control. But I think it has had impacts that he wouldn't admit, if that makes sense. I love all of these AI suggestions. And again, it's funny that I didn't actually ask AI about this. I asked AI about lots of things, but I didn't on this. So it's really great.
We do see that is raising her hand. If you want to share, I'd love to hear.
Yeah. Hi. So I'm a pedagogical design major, which is like systems of teaching and how we can build them. And one of the things that I did recently was interned with a educational advocacy law firm, where what they do is they take kids' IEPs and 504s, and kind of address the issues in them. And while I was there, one of the biggest problems that I found with IEPs and 504s is a lot of the time, like the parents in the schools and the caseworker or advocate will have these meetings, and then they won't actually update the IEP because they'll say that kids aren't meeting the goals that they're supposed to be meeting, so there's no need to update it, which is like obviously BS. But like we had a lot of clients whose kids were in high school and their IEPs hadn't been updated since they were like 8 or 9 because they had never met the goals that were laid out in their first IEP. And I was kind of wondering if it's similar in the UK, or if they're better about adjusting goals without them having been met per se.
So that's horrible to hear, first of all, and it is similar, but in a slightly more nuanced way, perhaps. So I know that when my son first got his sensory processing diagnosis at primary school, the Senko said to me, and she was a good Senko, so this just shows you, she said, don't bother getting an educational healthcare plan because we might not enforce it, we might not. The funding might get diverted into other things. You don't know. So that's one bit. I was saying to my son earlier, there was a case I read a few years ago where a dad in the UK had 2 sons with autism. The school had not been updating their plans, and it had not been providing the resources that were outlined in their plans. And he was on the verge of taking legal action. And the school wrote him a letter which he released to the press, saying, if you take both of your kids out of the school, we'll give you like £120,000, because then we won't have to worry about them and we'll have dealt with it. So you get a similar thing, but in slightly different ways. On the other hand, before it even reaches that stage, I have a friend who's a teacher. She told me that she works in a Catholic school, and what she's seen, and I mentioned that it's a Catholic school because I don't think they're very good specifically at dealing with neurodiversity. And I'm sure some are, but her one isn't. And they have been told as a faculty, if you think a kid has ADHD, autism, you cannot say that to their parent anymore. You cannot. You can say, maybe Johnny's a little bit lively, but do not say anything else, because frankly, we just do not want, we don't want that diagnosis coming. we don't want that pull on our resources coming. We don't want that educational healthcare plan. So those are some other examples I've seen of people doing basically what you've suggested, but in a slightly different, different degrees of shadiness, maybe. But yeah. Is there anything you guys think that could address some of these issues that we're raising sort of on a wider scale? I don't know about you guys, but one of the things, how to put this, when I first started to realize that I was probably neurodiverse, I found this amazing woman in the UK who, same age as me, same sort of ethnic background as me, probably figured out about 5 years before I did that she was neurodiverse. And she's got 5 children. They're all neurodiverse. She had her first child when she was 17, and she was in a really abusive relationship. And she differs from me in that she feels very angry that she wasn't diagnosed earlier, because she sees that as exposing her as quite a vulnerable person to situations that if she had have understood that at the time, she would have avoided, and she would have better understood some of those vulnerabilities. Now, whilst I totally get that, I feel for my generation, for the way I look, if I'd been diagnosed as a teenager, I feel that would have brought a whole new set of stereotypes on me, which may have been as damaging as not knowing, if that makes sense. So I feel like that's a very mixed bag. And question made me think about that, because because it really kind of reminded me of sort of my first jobs or my first career, when I didn't necessarily understand that, and I didn't necessarily understand certain social boundaries or expectations or rules, and I would information dump, or I would, you know what I mean? All of those sorts of things that you might do, and other people probably think you're a bit weird for doing, and a bit too over enthusiastic, or a bit. And what I know now is I could have harnessed that probably in a better way. So yeah, in some ways it would have been good to know those things, but that's what I like about what you're saying, that course, because I feel like particularly for creative industries, in a way, those checks and balances are probably more useful, because whether it's a music industry or TV or film or fashion, those are all a bit kind of, they're very glamorous industries, but they're also a little bit unregulated, and they're probably not the safest spaces for people like us, even though, trust me, I'm a stimmer in terms of I will watch the same show over and over again. I will make lists. I will rank the shows. I will rank the films. I find it so cathartic and I love it. That's my happy place. But, some of those special interests, there's probably lots of people like us in those industries, but there's also lots of people who aren't, and who would probably exploit that. Sometimes not even knowingly, but sometimes be quite brutal with people who presented differently. And I do think what you're describing, that could help safeguard some of that in lots of ways. And I think that's needed sort of across the board. I really do. I don't know what other people think about that.
Dawn, I think you had your hand up.
Yes, I love this discussion, but I was thinking about what Scarlett's said as part of the answer to how we deal with this. autistic pride. I will not do it. Just to say, I'm not going to do that. I had a great moment a few weeks ago where I had wrangled with a forum online, and I finally wrote to the people and said, I'm not doing this. And it was so, so liberating. And I see the healing that's happening in Casey, and I think that that's really key to that kind of autistic pride, knowing that we belong to a culture and knowing what we will and won't do, what's good for us and what's not good for us.
I see he also has his hand raised.
Yeah, I just wanted to say, and kind of pushing on the idea of pride and what we can do, and it's a hip hop program. Like, I mean, we're lucky out of school where my son is. He gets a lot of accommodations. They have speech language pathologists, his IEP. The teachers are very understanding. But all of that support is focused on helping him function in school according to the school rules, as opposed to helping him develop, in a way that's kind of appropriate to him. So it's helping him, if he needs to stim, there's a plan for him to leave the classroom and go stim for 5 minutes and come back so he doesn't disrupt the other students. Whatever it is. And like, I would just love to see more. And I realize that puts us head and shoulders above a lot of other schools where kids are being punished and not being allowed to stim and all that. But like, it'd be great to see it turn from inclusion and acceptance to kind of pride, to programs where special education isn't just like helping them follow the plan, but also like pursue their own interests in their own way. Like, I would love to see Adam's not into hip hop, but a similar program like Enoch was talking about with his special interests, where every kid in the world could have something like that, or it's beyond accommodation to and acceptance to like taking advantage of letting teaching kids how to thrive as themselves as individuals with these differences.
That's such a good point, because I remember one of the comments at primary school was about my son. He won't sit in his square. Like, they have these little squares on the carpet. He won't sit in his. So literally, they wanted every child to be kind of petite and poised enough to sit erect, sort of, nice straight back in their chair. I mean, there's so many reasons why, even if you're a neurotypical kid, you might not want to sit in your square. And again, it's this, like, it's almost kind of Victorian sort of, imposing sort of children should be seen and not heard. And as long as you stick to these rules, you'll be okay. And I think, again, I know it's topical at the moment, lots of us women who got missed at school. I know I went to convent school, and I know the comment was, she's brilliant at school, she's so good. And then when I'd go home, I would let rip because I was just, and I think that's a lot of people's experiences. And again, we were just trying to really contain ourselves all through the day with those rules. And I would love to see a more genuinely inclusive understanding for reasonable adjustments, because also the more familiarized everybody is with a whole variety of diverse behaviors and ways of expression, the more normalized it will become. And if we only keep promoting certain types of behaviors, then it's just normal, it's quite human that anything that deviates from that will be seen as a bit weird or a bit wrong, or needs to be sort of smooth around the edges or whatever. And that's such a shame. And again, I know lots of teachers have good intentions when they do this stuff, but some of it is so damaging. And before I joined today, I was looking back at some of the books I bought really early on in our journey. Sort of, they're not even 5 years old. Lots of these books about autism in lockdown, autistic teenagers, all of these things. And I realized how dated in that time these books have become, and even terms like high functioning, which you wouldn't really use as much now, or certain like real statements about, if you're autistic you will do this, and you know, and I just thought, wow, we really have come along quite quickly in a really short space of time. But like I said at the beginning, I don't feel like the legislation has quite caught up with some of the voices and some of the, you know, testimonies that people have given more widely. And that is one of the lovely things about forums like yours, is that no matter where we are in the world or in the country or whatever, we can share these experiences, and that's quite a comforting thing, to be able to have these networks. So that's lovely that you guys do this.
Thank you for sharing with us today, Scarlett. It's been really enriching. I think everyone's been able to take a piece for themselves from this today, and hopefully get to turn that over and advocate for the parts that we can do in our daily lives to make this whole mission better. We do have a comment to read. I know we're a little over time here, but I just wanted to squeeze it in really quick. They commented, asking teens if they want to identify as autistic empowers them to decide how they engage with their diagnosis. There are pros and cons to consider. Identifying as autistic can bring clarity and self-understanding, help access accommodations, and connect with others who share similar experiences. However, it might also feel limiting or expose them to stigma, depending on their environment. Teens should know that this decision to be out loud about autism is not permanent. They can change their mind as they grow and learn more about themselves. Identifying as autistic or choosing not to doesn't alter their rights or abilities. They can revisit the choice at any time. And they also followed up by saying a diagnosis can be protective, helping others understand behaviors as part of autism rather than mislabeling them as defiance, laziness, or personality flaws. Still, pride often grows from community, and many teens lack autistic peers. Without shared experiences, it may feel isolating. Building pride might require seeking online or broader networks of autistic individuals. Teens deserve the time and space to explore this decision in a way that feels right for them. And that was beautiful. Thank you for commenting that. And we are at time, aren't we, Dawn?
Yes, we sometimes go over, but I mean, I feel like this is a really sweet place to stop things. I would just like to invite Scarlett to come back and be a regular contributor, because this was so important, so well spoken, all of those points that needed to be made. So please consider joining us again,
Oh, I'd love
Scarlett.
to. Yeah, for sure. Thank you.
Great.
Thank you all. It's been really lovely. It's been so nice to see you all and hear from you guys too. Thank you.
Good.
Thank you,
Thanks again, and
Scarlett.
thanks again.
Thank you.
Everybody.
Take care.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.